Hi, Nima. Welcome back for your second solo show, Sunrise at the Vortex at the Third Line in Dubai. We're so happy to have you back or to have this monumental work, Roswell 2223, being featured as the sort of main, let's say, piece of the show alongside new works that are showing the evolution of your practice since the last show, which was 7 years ago.
Yeah.
In 2018 at the Third Line, and which was called 123, which was a series of works that you spent. I remember it was a year on working on, and now here we are with another work that you spent a year making at Roswell at your residency there. Can you start by telling me a little bit about the Roswell piece, and then we can talk a little bit more about the show?
Sure. I think the works in this collection basically span from spring 2022 to spring of 2025, and they start with the Roswell piece. I'd left Dubai in April of 2022 to start this one-year residency in Roswell, New Mexico. And for me, it was, after like whatever, a year and a half, almost 2 years of the COVID lockdowns,
Right.
and being in a small space. And I'd worked a lot in that time period. I'd made the Series 8 works. I'd made my first canvas piece. I'd done a lot of stuff in that time period, but I was beginning to feel the restrictions, like everybody was, of being in a lockdown in the city. So when I went to Roswell, it was a one-year residency. And when I got there, it was so much more expansive than I even thought. The amount of land we were sitting on, the quiet was deafening. And we had plenty of space in the residency itself because everyone got a small house with a large studio attached. The dimensions of the studio were basically just a little bit bigger than the dimensions of what ended up being this piece.
Right. So it basically this filled up the entire length of
the
studio slash apart or where you live.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
And that was it. It was like going there, I had promised myself, like, there's no pressure. The residency has no pressure on making work. So it really was like, I'm just going to get there and see what happens. And when I got there, I also realized, like, man, a year in this environment, that's a long time. This is a lot of space. I couldn't imagine just setting up, a table in the corner of the studio. So I just said, let's see what the biggest roll of canvas is that I can get. And so I got this piece. It was 18 feet by 6 feet. Rolled it out the first week of my residency, and it was just all white gessoed canvas. And then we didn't even have an art store in town, so I went to the local Home Depot hardware store, and I found a 9-foot engineering ruler. And so I brought that in, and I just started working on the piece. There was no real idea of where it was going to go, but like, the way I start working is, I start putting down an initial grid. So there's a 1-inch by 1-inch grid underneath, and it just started building up layer by layer. And like you said, it really took the entirety of the whole year. It's such a big piece. It's not just twice as big as my next biggest piece. It's 7 or 8 times.
Right. I was going to say, what was the largest piece you had made?
I think before that. Yeah, I think the first piece I had made on the canvas, on the linen,
it was like a meter and a half.
Yeah, I think it was 32 inches by 64 inches, in that range.
Yeah.
So you're talking the length of that was less than the width of this.
Right.
So, this was so much bigger.
Yeah.
And with this type of work, as you go bigger, you're talking about a lot more physical activity, meaning that every line is a minimum of 6 feet, but up to 9 feet long. That's much longer than my arm span. So I was like doing a lot of.
So it's about the physicality of making this work.
Absolutely, and feeling the physical limits.
Right.
There are certain things where, when I'm drawing the grid across this whole piece, it's 18 feet long and the ruler is 9 feet long. So even drawing the straight line across meant that, like, I had to do it in 3 different segments. And to randomize it a bit so, you don't see in the middle where it's always transitioning. So you really start realizing this thing is much bigger than I am. And there was a very beautiful aspect to that of like
Right.
really sitting on the artwork.
Yeah,
or
there's
being,
pictures of you I've seen of you
yeah,
like sitting on the artwork
yeah,
with also other friends of yours
yeah,
in the middle of the
yeah, absolutely.
because
Yeah, no, and that was it. It really became kind of it's like a grounding mat almost for me. I didn't, and the way this residency had everything set up was like these homes were super sterile in their appearance. They were all repainted. So it wasn't like even the homes had a character. It was
Right.
just a very strict environment as far as like pure focus on work. So for me, having this was like almost like my compatriot in these
Yeah.
times. And it was something that I really touched base with on
Right.
and working on it and seeing it grow so slowly,
Right.
but so definitively. If you see some of those, it took about 6 months for it to start looking like this.
Wow.
But in
Yeah,
the
I put
first
some
few
the
months,
early yeah.
you're really talking about like
And this
pastels,
and right. Did you know where it's gonna end or how it's gonna manifest? Or
I
is that
think
something that you were just
I think in the beginning, especially, there was a lot of just trusting the process. The piece is so big that it takes a lot to put any meaningful like pattern over it.
Right.
So it really was, I would say the first 2 months didn't exactly look like anything in particular, even with the gradient. Even though I intended to slowly build the gradient, after a while I was moving towards that direction, it wasn't really showing.
right.
So one of the nice things with my practice is that everything takes a long time. So in between these layers, as you're putting lines down, you start to get an idea of where it wants to go next and what's going to come next. So I think I would say that for the first 2 or 3 months, it was just building the fundamental structure underneath it that
Right.
other things were laid on top of, and getting some ideas of what the canvas is reacting to. At some point, let's say 3 or 4 months in, I knew that there was going to be this interplay of this gradient color layer made up of 16 colors, that is just kind of, I'm laying down colors in a specific order, and every time I do a layer, it's happening at different angles. So you're getting this softening gradient. And in between these color layers, there are these white line layers that are kind of smaller, definitive lines. They're not going edge to edge. They are the structural bones of what we see as the central element.
Right.
And so I would do a layer of color and then do a layer of white lines and a layer of color and a layer of white lines. So that kind of rule started becoming very obvious as what was going to happen.
Right.
Every time you add color, it saturates the piece, obviously. Every time you add white lines, it would soften that saturation, but would create kind of a unifying central element that would bring everything together.
Right.
So it was this push and pull every time.
Right.
There are pieces, there's photos, if you look 7 months into the process, where I would have laid down suddenly so much white line that almost a lot of the color disappears.
Right.
And then you do 2 layers of color and then it comes
Comes
back. So it really was a lot of this push and pull. And I would say maybe the last, let's say 5 months was just that push and pull, adding color, adding structure, adding color, adding structure. So by that point, as you get towards the end, it starts to crystallize what you are going to end up at. And I
Right.
think a lot of people ask me how you know when you're done.
When it's finished.
And it really is that you start seeing that no matter what you add, the level at which it's becoming something else starts decreasing.
Right.
It starts finding its own equilibrium, and you realize like we're getting to the end of the story for this piece. I can fundamentally change it and for it to move in a whole other direction. But for this part of the story, this was, you start feeling like you're coming to the end.
It's almost like the piece reveals itself to you over this period of time. So
Yeah.
and once it's revealed, then you're like, okay, this that's the time that you can stop. Which is amazing, because also when you look at the work, so many different, every time I look at the work, so many different things appear.
Yeah.
So many different forms appear. So many. It's almost like looking at the work every day is like looking at it anew.
Yeah.
Which is probably all the layers. or maybe it's where I'm focusing or where someone does look at the piece. But
Yeah.
literally, I mean, it's been here a week now,
Yeah.
and each time I've walked in, I have noticed another part of it, another layer,
Yeah.
or like a larger part of it, or like a very very small part of it. So
100%.
I think that's what the beauty or the sacred
Yeah.
that
And I
is
think
in the geometry.
there was
Yeah.
really also what I learned with doing this with the white color and with the white and the color toggling back and forth is that like you can also embed things in there
Right.
that are not immediately obvious. And it's something that I've done in work subsequently where there are things hidden so deep in there that unless you look at it at a particular angle, or if it hits it in a particular way, you won't even notice those layers are there. But I started to learn that I feel like you energize the piece by embedding these things deep inside it, whether people don't see it or not at the
Yeah.
first go. As your eyes get used to it, it's like getting used to the dark and starting to see other things starting to appear. In Roswell, we had famously dark skies over there, and really
Really?
being able to see like stars.
Because you don't have
The-
light pollution.
We have no light pollution. It's middle of nowhere, literally, and you really do spend a lot of time outside looking at the stars. And the longer you're out
Right.
there, you start seeing more and more. So,
Wow.
the gift of time and space that I got at the Roswell Artist in Residence program allowed me to start putting things inside the work that aren't immediately visible.
Right.
I always say like my work isn't necessarily like social media friendly because it's not supposed to just be a quick glance. I really do try to make the work for people who are going to live with the work, or who want to, in a public setting, let's say, they want to come back to it every once in a while. And when I was making this piece, I had the good fortune of making it in an open studio format,
Right.
whether in my own studio or at the Roswell Museum. I continued working on the
Right.
piece.
I remember that when that was the first place that you showed the piece.
Yeah,
at the Roswell Museum.
It was ongoing.
Yeah.
So this is the first time anyone has seen it finished.
Right.
But that was because my practice had become so much about the open studio. Even when they approached me about doing an exhibition, I said, I'll do an open studio in the museum,
Right.
but I don't have anything finished to show you yet.
Right.
But what it did was, I really did notice in both of those instances that there were a lot of people in Roswell that would come check in on the piece, that would come for the third or fourth time and say, oh, I was nearby, I just wanted to see where you're at with it. And so like, it started to feel very much like a public work, and it started to feel like people cared about its evolution. So it's almost, then you start feeling like a custodian of the piece, and really kind of being gentle with how you approach it as well. There was a former resident who lives there and was an art professor, taught painting basically, and he would always, like, in the beginning, he was like, I'm just worried you're gonna go too far. And he was like, he was almost like he couldn't control himself.
Right.
But then, it was those kinds of people that kind of almost served as a audience mentor in a way, where just by judging their reaction, you're getting an idea of where to go with the piece.
Right.
As well. So I think that my approach to this piece really was with a lot of respect for people that would view it, and hoping that it would be a thing that would always be viewed. That is something that hopefully people can come back to and look at in multiple ways.
But I mean, I think the piece also has to be seen in person because it has an energy. And I think, moving on to, the other works that are in the show, and speaking about vortexes and the traveling that you have done since. So, the Roswell 22-23 piece was a very, I guess, solitary piece for a year, until it did go into the Roswell Museum. We finished working on it.
Yeah.
But it was also during a time, we just come out of COVID, but then you go into this residency and and then you make this work, and then you leave Roswell and you decide to go and explore. And Roswell's also, is it a vortex as well, or is it supposed to be is it one of the vortexes?
Well, I think so. Moving to Roswell was also the furthest I'd been from a big city ever.
Right.
Roswell is so far away from, being a big city. It's 3 hours drive from Santa Fe, which is considered a small town
Yeah.
by American city standards. So um, it was 3 hours away from an international airport, and even like Albuquerque, which is considered middle of nowhere, is 3 hours drive away. So we were really, really middle of nowhere, super small town. And so one of the things there that I really learned was that to keep myself busy and engaged and inspired, I would always go for long drives. I would drive to Santa Fe and Albuquerque once in a while, but I also would just go for long drives. White Sands National Park is nearby there. The Carlsbad Caverns, where you go deep underground and see all these
Wow.
formations, was nearby there. Everything around there is
Very special.
special and weird. They uh, on the license plates in New Mexico, the state motto is written, "The Land of Enchantment," and it's extremely flat. It's a place where every sunrise, every sunset is intense, super, super intense. And so, you know, um, one of the things I've said to people is that I've noticed since Roswell that the further away you get from big cities, the further away you get from these distractions, everywhere you go, people speak about that land as either sacred, as being an energy center, as being a vortex. And I learned really quickly that there is no real scientific distinction.
Right.
There is
Where
no one
the
who
vortex are
measured
yeah.
thing. I really did think that it was a measured thing.
Yeah.
But I started to notice is that people have a certain respect for the histories of things that have gone on there.
Right.
People take care of the land in a special way. So all of this led me to realize that, if you respect the magic that we live in everywhere in the world, everywhere is a sacred space.
Right. It's just we're most of the time very too distracted to
We're
notice.
distracted, and there's just too much noise, and it's very difficult to be driving down the street with billboards for things that you don't need and go like, wow, I'm in a magical place, So I think, but when you're driving for 3 hours and seeing the landscape stay the same, and then you see a massive a mountain or a structure, or you go up a hill or you come down another side, if you're the only people for miles and you're looking at a mountain, everyone has a story, everyone has an idea about energies and things that are happening. So I think what started in Roswell as kind of a motivation to get out into the world and to get away from, I've always grown up in big cities, to get away from that energy, to get into kind of a lot of quiet and to be able to deal with it. Because like I said, Roswell, it all sounds very romantic in its notion, but when you're out there, it's deafening how quiet it is.
Right.
Like not seeing people is very, it's like time is totally stopped.
Right.
But I really loved that feeling because it really was challenging and interesting. So I really started traveling a lot. And so since then, my girlfriend and I have done the drive coast to coast twice.
And stopped in all of those places.
Stopped in different places. Most recently, we've done the Grand Canyon. In Sedona, Arizona is where everyone talks about these 7 vortexes.
All of them are in Sedona.
These 7 that they
So
speak about are in Sedona. And it was really there where you would read about each one, and you never really know where this information is coming from. It's just that people are saying this place is a vortex of masculine energy. The energy swirls in this direction. This one's conducive to X, Y, Z. And so now what's interesting is then you go to those locations and you see a lot of people there treating that location with so much respect that it imbues the whole environment with that energy that you expect to find.
Exactly.
So regardless, I'm a big advocate for the idea that we clearly live in a magical universe. We clearly don't understand all of its mysteries. And every time that we collectively activate that sense of wonder, it really multiplies, and we create these energy centers, we create these vortexes. But we did stay at a hotel that was at, there's a vortex on the street called Airport Mesa Road. And because I think it was one of the highest points in Sedona, that's where one of the first airports was built.
Okay.
But still to this day, that's where most people see, that seems to be one of the most accessible ones. And there's this old hotel that's still there that we stayed at. And we would always make a point of watching sunset and sunrise at those points. And, you know, on that trip, we did a lot of that, waking up before dawn, going to the points where everyone gets together and watching the sunrise at the Vortex. And really, that started to become what I started to think of this collection of works, because there was a sense that I'd gone from a very deeply studio practice.
Right. And
Where-
then 1 year in Roswell,
Yeah,
but
1
also
year
it was
was-
studio practice.
Yeah, it wasn't studio
Yeah.
practice, but just to make it through, I had to spend a lot
Wow.
of time away from
Outside,
the studio.
yeah.
And I started to, when I think you probably remember when I first started, I had a bit of energy about me that was like, I had a feeling that I had to catch up to a lot of people because I started so late. So I almost had like a production mentality about my work, where it was like, I could get a lot of work done and I could sacrifice whatever needed to be done to make
Right.
the work.
Yeah, I remember you used to work 10 hours a day,
Yeah,
just every day.
yeah.
And
I wouldn't know what day of the week
you would,
it was.
yeah, and exactly. And it would be like, are you going to leave your studio?
No,
And you were like, you're going to hurt your eyes.
No, I just felt like you know, because of the way my practice had come around, I felt like the universe had given me something, and I was trying to be respectful of the thing I had been given.
Right.
And so, but during the pandemic, also realizing being inside all the time is not helping me expand my practice, because my practice is really a lot about trying to understand these patterns that occur in nature, the
Right.
beauty that occurs in nature, why certain things we think are beautiful, what's the technicality behind why something has a beautiful quality, why the texture in nature
Right.
is important, why pattern is. So
But also
I
the
think
cosmos, mapping the
you have
sky,
you have to
stars.
be engaged with it. So I think
Yeah.
that you know, naming the show Sunrise at the Vortex was a nod to wanting that type of experience to be a bigger part of my practice, to not feel bad that I was taking a day away from the studio to travel to a weird part of the world where people say an energy emanates. I want to explore those places.
Yeah.
And I think for people that aren't able to go to those places, I'm able to bring back some of what I experienced one way
or the
another.
energy of that
Yeah.
place.
And to
that's
embed
what-
it.
Yeah, and I think really like seeing these works in person is something that everyone has to do, because I think it's really hard. Like you said, they're not Instagrammable, but they have an energy. Like you know, I think all artworks, you know, sure you see it in person, because actually the energy that was put in it by the artist, but you know, it also that or what it is about or inspired by comes through when you're standing in front of it.
Yeah.
But I wanted to also talk to you about the new works that are inspired by these outings and leaving the studio and going to watch sunrises and sunsets at different vortexes.
Yeah.
These new works. So when you came back to New York, because now you're between New York and Dubai.
Yeah.
More in New York.
Or New York, yeah, but trying.
Cinderella, yeah. So what, you know, tell me a little bit about the evolution of going from making all of your works were up until this point in Roswell, including Roswell 2223, were all made by you, by hand, with a ruler and, you know, pencils, pens, etc. And that, of course, that this is also part of the reason why they would take as long to produce.
Absolutely.
So when you get to New York, something changes because you've been spending a lot of time outside, and you realize you cannot just rely on this way of making your work.
Yeah.
Because you wouldn't be able to make as many works as you'd like to.
Absolutely.
As you're inspired to. So what changed, and tell me a little bit about the tools that you are now using.
Sure. Yeah. So, you know, I always tell people that while I'm working on a piece, that's usually when the idea for the next piece comes up. So you know, because you hit like these points where you have to make a decision. You're like, no, I'll continue doing this for this work, but for the next piece, I'm going to do this thing. And so it was interesting working on Roswell because it was a year of not making other pieces. So I was really filling up with a lot of ideas along the way.
Right.
And I was discovering new techniques. And so mentally, I was really getting into the zone of like, these ideas are getting extremely complex. At the same time, if you see any of the time lapses of me working on this piece, you'll see like it's almost a ridiculous level of physical activity.
Yeah, it really is.
I had like knee pads, like professional grade knee pads I had to use because I was on the ground, but I couldn't always kneel. So I was either squatting, sometimes I was bending over.
Which like physically, like you stuck
Yeah.
well, like
No,
back
I think there was like,
yeah.
there was a little bit of irreparable damage.
Right.
But what I started to realize is like, there was a level of physical pain
Hmm.
that was really building up in my body that was honestly becoming a bit worrying because, you know, I've always done yoga.
Yeah.
I was even in Roswell doing like these Epsom salt baths after
Yeah.
every night,
Relax,
like to
but-
relax
yeah.
everything. And it was really like, man, this is really, there's too much pain going on here. And anyone that I knew that was in the medical field would always say this repetitive motion is not a good thing. This is what causes long-term damage.
Yeah.
And just kind of anecdotally, I was speaking to someone about, well, let's say I needed shoulder surgery at some point. Would that solve everything? And I said, no, that's the end of that. You can't do it anymore.
Right.
You can't lift anything over 25 pounds and you can't be doing
Wow.
things. You might be out of pain, but that's the end of that.
Right, but
So
you just yeah.
so what I was facing is like coming up on this like a bunch of ideas that I wanted to do that were more complex than anything I'd ever done before, even more complex than Roswell, maybe not size-wise, but actual complexity. And then at the same time, seeing a physical limitation, which I really thought I could push through the physical pain for another 2-3 years if I wanted,
Right.
but also knowing I have ideas as far as I'm concerned for the rest of my lifetime, and I want to keep expanding my work. So I need to really find a way to future-proof my ability to manifest this work. And you know, too, my grandfather was a geometric artist,
Right.
did a lot of the similar work that I did. And I saw his ideas kept getting more and more complex,
But then-
but he wasn't executing them at a certain point.
Right.
And the last 10 years or so of his life, I felt like he was in a very, let's say, unhappy state because he had the ideas and he
But he
could,
couldn't.
but he couldn't manifest them. So for me, it really started to become very something I wanted to be very intentional about knowing if I want to do this work, I need a different tool. And at the same time, you know, I know my work well enough that, to be very frank, I can do a simplified version of a lot of these works,
Yeah.
not put in those hidden layers,
Right.
and it would be satisfactory for the audience.
Yeah.
But that's not the work I'm trying to make. I
Right.
really am trying to make the absolute most complex work, and the
Right.
things that I think of fully, I want to manifest them.
Right.
So that was where I was at. Now, I've always, even before I made works ever by hand on with rulers on canvas and paper, I have always known how to do digital artwork anyways. I taught myself Adobe Illustrator and Photoshop during my previous career, and I'd always kind of known how to navigate those programs. I'd even done some digital animation for
Right.
one
I remember.
show
Yeah.
in 2018, and a lot of times I would sketch out certain parts of the works.
But then
that-
you were using like works that you made, and then you put them through.
yeah, there were things that I was doing, but I've always used digital tools.
Right.
So at some point, I came across these pen plotters that people were using. There was like a small group of more like hackers and coders
Yeah.
that were using these old school, very simple machines in their structure. You know, these are the types of machines that have been around since the 50s or 60s. Generally, most famously used to make architectural blueprints, and they're very simple in their structure. They basically hold a pen.
Mm-hmm.
They have an x-axis and a y-axis, and the z-axis for how far up and down it goes. And essentially, one way or the other, instructions are sent to this machine on how to draw a line. You essentially say from point x10, y10,
Yeah.
you put the z down,
Right.
and then you move to like X10, Y20, and then you lift the Z up, and then you go back.
So it's like programming, you're
So
coding.
there's coding involved, and like over the years, people have found other ways to send the information to the machine. Now, what worked really well for me is because I knew how to use Illustrator, I would draw everything on the computer in very much the same way that I'm drawing on paper.
Yeah.
So it's not taking less time to make those
Right,
pieces.
because you still have to.
You're still drawing it by hand.
Yeah.
Yes, there's definite advantages to drawing on computer versus on paper.
Yeah.
But, for instance, there are very big drawbacks. For instance, on a very large piece, if you want to drop a very specific point, my artwork is usually like 1/16 of an inch apart.
Right.
So I would have to zoom in very far on the screen,
Right.
drop that anchor point, zoom all the way out, move to the side of the painting that you want to drop the line in, zoom back in.
Yeah.
So some cases are much easier to draw by hand on paper. Some are more difficult.
Yeah.
But it's basically
Yeah.
as intensive as a process.
Right.
For me, physically, the benefit is that you're looking at a screen this big instead of like bending over a table
Right.
and getting up. And so even if you see the works that I've made on tables, you see the time lapse, I'm getting up and down
All the
so
time.
the
Yeah.
pain is coming from that. But being able to be on a computer screen, I'm able to draw it with less physical pain. Then the challenge is translating that into a language that the machine will understand, dividing all these multiple colors into individual layers, breaking each one of those layers into the number of pens you want to use,
Right.
and then sending that information in batches of lines to the machine for it to draw. So
Wow.
the process is definitely added a lot more steps to my flow. The pieces still take, when we look at something like this still took a month of plotting after the artwork was done.
Right.
And a lot of
this
the
is
time,
made not with lines.
this is another huge advantage of using the machine. Is one of the big advantages is you can use different building blocks.
Right.
This one is made with 4 million dots. So it's what I was trying to show with something like that is that we're not talking about an artwork that I could have done by hand, but I'm choosing not to. It's something this would not exist. This is just something that would not exist without the use of these tools.
Yeah.
So everything that I make, my approach to it is the tools that are the easiest form of making that artwork manifest. I think that people might confuse the fact that my work is inherently difficult to think that I'm adding difficulty for no reason. It's never the case.
Right.
I make difficult work in easiest way possible.
Right.
And the easiest ways are usually very difficult. So, but I'll never do something.
Yeah.
So I could have making Roswell could have been more difficult if I decided to draw the whole thing with my left hand.
Right.
If I decided to use crayon instead of like
But also, you
archival.
couldn't have made Roswell with this.
There's
tool,
no,
actually.
today there's no pen plotter that can even draw, let's
Half
say
of
an
this.
eighth of the size of this.
Right.
There's everything in this show is made in the medium that it demands to be seen in its most truthful and full manifestation. There's always shortcuts that if you'd never seen Roswell, I could have stopped 5 months earlier and you wouldn't know the difference.
I wouldn't know. Yeah.
But for me, it wasn't finished yet. So for it to get to a finished state, I had to work 5 more months, bending over, breaking my back on it to get to that point. The same thing with source code. There's a point at which I could have stopped plotting 2 weeks in, but it just wasn't as saturated as I wanted to be. It didn't have the texture I wanted it to have. So one of the main things with using the plotters is we can use different building blocks. The examples we have in the show are this is made with dots. There's another one that's made with dots. Curved lines is another thing that I could never do with rulers. Is like I can create these parabolas, which I would never had access to, which are a huge part of geometric art. And they also lead to being able to do circular centers. So a lot of the pieces, because the show is about vortexes, are fully circular centers, which means that I'm doing things at many, many angles that aren't using simple anchor points. Before, I was working physically and had to put these Post-it notes on the edges as anchor points. So the number of anchor points you can have in an artwork was limited, so your angles are limited. Now I have more angles, I have different building blocks I can use, and the other thing is I have a lot more saturation to the artwork.
Right.
Anyone that sees these pieces realizes they're much brighter because they're much, much more saturated. You can experiment with colors more easily. Now, don't be fooled. For every piece that you see in this show, there is a version of it that I've torn up and thrown out because working with a machine is much, much more error prone than working by hand. I'm so used to drawing these lines. I know the second that I put the ruler down if I'm about to make a mistake because visually I can scan all of it.
Right.
The machine is not thinking in any
Right.
way. It's just listening
It's just
to
listen
three
to
instructions.
your instructions. Yeah.
Yeah, 3 movements. Back and forth, up and down this way. So it's like you can, if I'm literally looking at files that are 200 layers
Wow.
for 200 pens. And so it's very easy for me, for instance, to have like clicked the wrong layer to plot, and all of a sudden that artwork is done. The machines also, like I said, can be quite rudimentary. I have 5 of these machines. Each one works in its own way. One that I use for that is so simple that just by plotting one layer, it would almost move itself out of position. So I would have to recalibrate it every time to like
Right.
put it back. So everything has its own limitations, but because this is the only way to manifest this artwork,
Yeah.
again, I'm stepping into that difficulty. I will say the difficulty that I'm contending with for the machine-made pieces has the benefit that it doesn't have that physical shoulder
Right.
pain and back pain for me. So it's
At
just
least you're able to still stay in
absolutely.
good physical shape
Yeah,
and continue to manifest.
100%.
And I feel it because I think these new works definitely have, I mean, honestly, you can't really tell the difference
Yeah,
at all.
yeah,
That
yeah.
oh, I mean, except for if you like look at the edges of the
100%.
Roswell,
Yeah,
you know. But honestly, they have something that I don't believe the earlier work, I mean,
yeah.
could have manifested. You know, there's
100%.
just there's something else that I feel that yes, you needed to have a new tool in order to make them.
No, it's true.
And I don't think it takes away from the fact, and like you said, you will still be making works that are by hand when that
Yeah.
requires it, when the work
Exactly.
requires it.
You know, like I think what's always been interesting about my work, if you look at 1, 2, 3, that show,
Yeah.
the thing we got the most was people were saying, "Are you doing this with machine?"
Exactly.
And so I think that the type of work I make is a level of detail or whatever that does evoke a production level that is very exact. When I was doing it by hand and when I was here in my studio, there was a moment where I started feeling like I was the machine and producing.
Exactly.
And once I started to step out of the studio and see the importance of, let's say, the sunrise.
Yeah,
and
like
the
going out and getting this inspiration to make these works.
yeah, so a lot of it, even then I was thinking like, the machine should be the machine and I should be the human. And it's why I deliberately put so much texture in some of the works that I want is, if you look at the piece Darkest Before Dawn on the other
Right.
side, that is something that I don't think people can compute either way. Like if I say I did it by hand or if I did it by machine,
That really looks like a painting.
you really can't.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's another limitation that the machine
Yeah.
helps me overcome, is that like things that are so wet with the media,
Yeah.
that is,
that won't smudge if you had.
if I had a ruler on the piece, it would
Yeah.
destroy it. So there's so many, and this is just 1 year in of using the pen plotters. Now at the
Right.
same time, I've told you before, I've always been interested in learning how to airbrush, for instance. I've been looking at learning how to weave. These are all things that work in a coded or deliberate way.
Yeah. Also, the digital. We should mention the digital pieces that.
Yeah.
Was it earlier this year that you did this
Yeah.
commission for Jameel Art Center,
Absolutely.
which
yeah.
was one of the first, I guess,
Yeah.
large-scale
Oh,
digital
yeah.
works. And so we also have one in the show
Yeah.
today. So maybe talk a little bit about
Yeah.
the other work and
I think it was very fortuitous, that Jameel Art Center reached out and wanted to do this commission for this artwork. And it's basically a projection mapped animation that we projected onto the facade of their building. And the piece was called Signal, and it was very reminiscent of the animation I'd done for 123 as well. A lot of my artworks, essentially, I think people always make the comment that they feel kinetic, they feel like they're moving, and I always say even pieces like Roswell, it's almost like we've captured one frozen frame of an eternally moving function, whether it was like a moment in the universe, whatever it is, but it's supposed to feel kinetic. And so obviously on canvas, on paper, we have the limitation. But what I wanted to show in 123 even was that these pieces are meant to be connected to create a kind of an insinuated movement. When I'm able to work digitally, I think people really do see the full scope of what it is that I was trying to show. And for the piece at Jamil, it was supposed to feel like this very soft breath and inwards and outwards, and something that we knew that it was for the opening party for Art Dubai, so we wanted to be something you can look at continuously. And being there, seeing it projected so large, and then seeing people standing beneath it, look at it, that
was amazing.
For me, that was, it is a kind of a dream come true, because, I really like immersive artworks. I like artworks that are bigger than life. I like things that people can engage with in a way that feels freeing, that it was outdoors. So that was a big inspiration for me to kind of dip back into working seriously with animation. Now, again, my skill set is limited. I've done all of these animations in Photoshop. I've done them as like separate frames. So the animation here, the pull of the pulse, was also something that I wanted to make to emulate, not exactly in its visual, but in the feeling of someone sitting and watching a view, or watching a sunrise, or engaging with what they imagine to be the pulse and energy of whatever it is they're gazing at. Because that is something I would see a lot as I was traveling, is people, when we went to the Grand Canyon, you see people standing around the rim of the Grand Canyon, not even being able to fully understand what is going on, but sitting and waiting. And so that's something I wanted to emulate.
And feeling.
And that is the thing, is that there is a sense that that time is opening up again, and that you're feeling something that, and that's why it's called the pull of the pulse. Is like, I think there's a pulse to the universe, and, those are more scientifically proven, that we see energies moving in waves. And then the pull of it, subconsciously sitting there and feeling pulled towards something. So the way I did this is, I hand drew again the pieces on the computer. The original image is, just for context, something close to 200,000 lines, all individually placed and laid out. And then I went into Photoshop and made 360 versions of that actual image. And so and the hue on each image is changed by 1 degree. So it goes from -180 hue all the way to +180. So there's 360 different hues of the same image. So the actual pattern on that isn't changing. It's that the colors that are coming into focus are changing. So it does look like something that's continuously blossoming. And it is on a loop, and it has a singing bowl soundtrack that goes with it. So
it's very meditative. Well, actually, this whole show is, and I think, a lot of the people that came to see it at the opening, sadly, the opening was on a very, very difficult day for a lot of people here in the region because of what's happening in Iran. But a lot of people reacted to the works in a way that they felt calm, or the work, they felt this good energy, and they felt like healed. And people were saying these works are very healing, and I think that is really coming through. So thank you for that.
I mean, I think, honestly, I've always spoken about my work as for me, it's almost a type of archaeology. I'm finding these things through my dedication to the practice. So I'm always just grateful that I'm able to make these things that I think are beautiful, and they are representative of the type of journey that I've been on and the things that I've felt along the way. And I think that it's the property of everybody um, the way that we connect to this work, the way that children connect to this work.
Yeah, a lot of children connect
Yeah.
with the animation. I noticed that
Yeah,
they just wanted
people
to
ran in there.
Yeah.
They just stopped and looked at it. And so for
Yeah.
me, it's like
We also had
biggest
some
compliment.
dogs at the open.
Yeah, we had
The dogs.
every creature likes it. So and that's why I say like I do think sometimes when to wrap up the previous question, when you look at something like the animation, that's nothing I could have done if I had drawn it on paper. And even if I scanned it in and whatever, like there's just no way to have gotten the accuracy of the piece or the luminosity of the piece. It's not at all related to pen plotters in any way. That is a completely different thing.
Yeah.
It's 100% done digitally. I did it in the way that I know is easiest. Now, someone who knows animation might say like, dude, there's a program you could do this in a minute instead of a month. Great. Once I learn that, I'll learn that and I'll take that route. So the most important thing for me is that I think that these things have a value and they should be out in the physical world instead of stuck in my head. And to bring them out into the physical world, whatever tool they need. Some need a tool like this, some need a tool like that. And so it took me a long time to come to terms with that my practice isn't changing because my process is changing. But once I came to terms with it, I started seeing like I'm actually making what the work is demanding in the way that it's demanding it. And there has to be a consciousness that, we might call certain tools traditional, but they were technology in their time. A compass was technology, a protractor, a ruler. These pens that I use, these amazing pigments, they're not traditional. They've been invented in the past 20 years. So we can't pick an arbitrary date in the length of this huge universe and say, no tools after 1973. That's Nima's practice. That to me, that seems illogical.
And limiting and why,
And why?
especially in a time where we are using technology more and more to assist and to learn and to grow. And like you said, like let the machine do what the machine does and let me be a human. And these works do need to be in the world and we do need to feel healed and we do need to, and if these works weren't in the world and then what else is there? What we need to feel the calm that we feel when we look at the world. We need to feel healed by something, because otherwise everything is destruction.
And we in an interview the other day, someone said, well, it makes me feel like you're going to make, or we're at a cusp where works are going to be made that have never been able to be made, so that we're going to see things we've never seen before.
Exactly.
And so, for me, that's important to live in the time that I'm living, to use the tools that I'm given, and to not draw these false parameters to limit myself in any way. I think that I feel very expanded right now. I feel like in a state that, especially because the reaction was so positive, that no one was really concerned about the product, because people are like, this thing is nice and I want it to be here. So I feel that it's opened me up a lot. And I'm already, my mind is already thinking about all the
next show,
the next
work.
I think seeing people relate to the work is the most important for me. And I think that when you see people like a piece this big, you're like, how can I make something bigger? How can I make, I am very interested in working with lights and animation. And I do think there is something about catching people in a natural outdoors space, or I like internal spaces. And so I think that I'm beginning to feel out different boundaries.
All the possibilities.
I think that I'm feeling much more free because I freed myself from the thinking that my practice has to be a guy hunched over a table for 12 hours a day, proving something that need not be proven. I think the artwork should exist, whether someone sees this today and thinks it was made today, or if it was made in the year 3000 or in the year 1800. I don't think it should make a difference. It should just be that the work makes them feel a particular way and that it's in the universe.
Thank you, Nima. Thank you so much for making these work, and I'm looking forward to the next.
Amazing. See you next time.
Thank you.
All right.